sisters and brothers, to the monthly Satsang. I hope everyone is doing fine. Before we go on to the speakers, just a quick announcement. As many of you may already know, Sadhguru Madhusudan Sai will be visiting with his entourage in April to USA again. So it's a joyous occasion, and we plan to have a satsang with him at the Los Gatos Center in California on April 13th. So more details to follow with the website and the timing details and the venue details. So please stay tuned. All right. So today we are very, very happy to have with us Bob and Rita Daniel as our guest speakers for this satsang. To give a brief intro about them, Bob and Rita have been with Swami for many years. In fact, Swami arranged their marriage of this divine couple back in 1978. So they've been associated with him for almost 45 to 50 years and have had numerous experiences with the divine. They've also authored the book called Together in God, which I'm sure they will share during their talk today. In fact, Sadhguru had personally invited them to stay at his lotus feet in the Mudanali ashram. So they're currently joining us from the ashram, actually. So with no further ado, we'd like to turn over today's satsang to Bob and Rita Daniel, please.
Great. Bob and Rita, our immense gratitude for you both joining us. I know it's early in the morning and everybody's going to have breakfast and you're going to miss your morning breakfast at the canteen. But please know that this means a lot to everyone. And it really, as I was listening, Rita, today, your experiences, just preparing for this, and I could not stop the tears coming down. There was, it was really impossible not to be affected by you and Bob. So much devotion, so much faith, so much divinity. So please believe me that this is not only from me, but everyone who's present, that we are most grateful for you being here. And I hope that this is only the first one, and we already would like to ask you to come again, as Swami sees appropriate. So we will not talk much about that. But let me go ahead and say that you both have been with Swami, the avatar, for so long. And you have been around Swami so closely. In fact, Swami arranged your marriage. In fact, you asked Swami that, you don't want any husband unless it's a man that you recommend. So I would like to ask you and Bob both, when did this spiritual journey start? I'm sure that it must have started before even going to India, before maybe even seeing Swami. So please share with us.
Can I start at the beginning?
Yes.
So when I was a little girl, I would sit out on the back porch underneath this big, big Chinese elm tree. And I remember feeling very alone, not lonely, but alone. And I would talk to God every day and I'd say, God, why? Why am I here? Well, some years later, we had heard about Sai Baba from some very dear friends. Julie and Harry Miles were very good friends with my mother. And we had left our church and we were looking for answers. And we met Walter and Elsie Cowan, and this was after Walter had passed away and Swami had brought him back to life. And he was actually dead for 3 days. 3 hours. And Swami went to the morgue and pulled the sheet back and said, "Rise, Cowan, I have work for you to do." And that was when he told them he wanted them to start the Sai Baba International Book Center of America. And in those days, there was nothing like that. The only books that were ever published were in India. Now it's all over the world, but in those days, there was nothing. And Walter lived for 18 more months. And Elsie would say to me, you know, honey, Walter was always a good man, a loving man, a good man. But when he came back, when Baba brought him back, he was pure love.
Wow.
And I was driving one day to work, and I remember driving in my 62 blue Comet with wings. It was so ugly, nobody would even steal it, but it was safe to drive. So I was driving down the road, and I remember putting my foot down so hard, I thought I would put my foot through the floor, but I meant it. It was a divine determination. And I said, Swami, I cannot and I will not go on another day unless I can come see you. Because I first heard of Swami when I was 13, but I was too young. I had no money. There were no devotees. There were no meetings. There was nothing. I was 13, so I had to wait 6 years. And that night when I got home from work, the telephone rang. And on the other end, I heard, honey, how would you like to go to India? That's how fast God responds to a heartfelt prayer.
Amazing.
And that was 1974. It was Elsie Cowan. And she had just lost her eye. It had hemorrhaged due to negligence. She didn't have to lose that eye. And the reason I tell you that story is because she's such an amazing, amazing example of love in action. She never sued. She never took any recourse. Never. Nothing. In fact, she never complained. I never heard until 3 years later how much pain she was in, until she said to me, honey, you don't know what pain is. That's all she ever said.
Right.
So we went to India, and we were sitting underneath the banyan tree in Vrindavan, listening to bhajans. And all of a sudden, this hush came across the compound. And all of a sudden, I opened my eyes, and there was Baba. And I said, oh, now I know why, God. Now I know why. To be in your presence. So Baba called us in and talked to us, and he told us to come to Puja Party. But in those days, it was very different. It was very rustic. There were only 2 buildings for people to stay in, and it was July, and it was very, very hot. And there was no food other than the Indian canteen, and it was very spicy, very difficult for the Western palate. And we would have starved if Mrs. Rottenlaw hadn't brought us lunch every day, as Swami asked her to do. In fact, we didn't know that Swami had asked her to do that until many years later, when I had the chance to thank her for her kindness. And she said, oh, no, Swami told me to bring you lunch every day. So there were 7 of us. We had to bring our own water for 2 weeks for 7 of us. And one day we were sitting in the room, and there was no furniture. The water, sometimes it was running, sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes there was electricity. There was only one broken couch, and it was about half the height of me. It was small, and it was broken in the middle. And that's what Elsie slept on with her hemorrhaged eye. She slept on that, and the rest of us slept on the floor. And one day I saw Camille Svensson. Those of you who have been around a while know Camille Svensson was a Sanskrit scholar. She was an amazing woman, and not always appreciated for how great she was, because she was very scholarly. She was very well versed in the Sanskrit. But one day I saw her fall outside, and I ran outside and I said, oh my God, Camille's fallen. And so I ran outside to help her, and I looked up and I said, oh my God, she has fallen. At the Lord's feet, there was Baba standing there. Oh, and he was coming to our room. And I quickly ran back inside, and we were in these muumuus and things, and we were trying to change. And, you know, we were just learning about how to put on a sari and have any skill at it. And we were scurrying around, and in he walks, and he sits down on the one little chair that we had. And he gave us our first interview. And the first thing he ever said to us was, this body is not Sai Baba. And that has been a theme that has been woven through many, many years of understanding all that he has meant. And if I forget, please remind me. I would like to come back to that at the end.
Sure.
But he sat back in his chair and he looked at me for a long time. And I was 19. And I wasn't seeing anyone. I was in school. I was working hard. I was supporting myself. I worked at the bookstore from about 16. And those days it was very small, and I would call the bookstore and they would say, no, we don't need any help. And I'd say, okay. And then I call back the next week and they say, no, we don't need any help. I kept calling back week after week after week. And finally they said, my God, we better give this girl something to do. She'll never leave us alone. So I started with stamping books and cleaning toilets. Whatever I could do, I was happy just to be there, because you could feel his presence.
Of course.
And so he looked at me and he said, you, where is your bend? I said, my bend, Swami? Your bend. Husband. Where's your husband? I said, Swami, I don't have a husband. Yes, you do. Who is he? I said, I don't know, Swami. Yes, you do. Who is he? Swami. Yes, you. And I just quit arguing with God. I said, Swami. He said, I know. It's a secret and it's sacred. And he proceeded to make me this big ring. It was so big. On my little 19-year-old finger, it was full of diamonds and a picture of him in the middle. And I'd also like to come back to that theme too later on. Swami blessed me with many things that he's given through the years. And everything he ever gave me was big. And I could never understand it, because I would choose little pearl earrings. I would wear little tiny, everything I wore was little.
Right.
And everything he gave me was big. I looked like an Italian Christmas tree everywhere I went. And it was a little embarrassing, to tell you the truth, because I thought, what will people think? I'm walking around with these big earrings.
Right,
you know?
right.
But I came to realize many, many years later why that was. Because as a little girl, just to backtrack just a little, I hope you have some patience with me.
Oh, of course, Rita, of course.
Born in the Christian Science Church. Right. And I didn't realize what an immense blessing that was, because it was very intellectual, very spiritual, but I didn't understand it as a child. And I'm not sure even people that went there really understood it. And, but we believed in prayer. And our friends that I told you about, that told us about Sai Baba, that took us to Elsie Cowan, they had a little girl that died, that didn't really need to die, because she had a medical emergency that could have been averted. And when that happened, sometime later, I needed an operation on my leg, or I would have lost it. And my mother was not having that. She said no. And we left the church. And the reason why that was a significant time in our life was that it broke up my parents' marriage, because that's what brought them together, was the church and their love of God. And it was what they believed in. And when you didn't have that, and when you pulled that master thread out of the tapestry just became threads. There was no tapestry. And I would go to school and I was always set apart. My brother and myself and Meredith Whipple were the only Christian scientists I ever knew. And we would always be sitting outside when people were talking about health or something to do with the body. But I didn't understand. I just knew that I was different. And what set me apart became my blessing. But as a child, it's very alienating. What I didn't understand at the time came back later. One time, there was an epidemic of smallpox, and Mom and Dad were talking about that. And as soon as they started talking about it for about 15 minutes, they told me this story. Mom, Dad, I have spots all over me.
Oh, wow.
And they looked at each other and they started to laugh, and they realized their folly. They were thinking about the trouble. They weren't talking to God. Right. So they stopped what they were doing and they sat down and they prayed. And about 15 minutes later, they tell me, I said, Mom, Dad, the spots are all gone.
Oh my God.
And so the reason that that's significant was that it was the beginning of an understanding of what prayer means. Prayer isn't just a formality, it's a talking to God, it's a thinking about God. And it isn't that you don't go to doctors, it isn't that you don't go to hospitals. What I know now that I didn't know then was that it's something very beautiful that Emmett Fox talks about in his book called Power Through Constructive Thinking, which Sai Baba had come to me and given me in my dream. And he went
Right.
through all the pages, and then he handed me the book. And in the book, he opened it up to the chapter that said, "Be still and know that I am God." And he handed me the book. And then when we went to Buddha party shortly after that, I took the book with me because I really wasn't sure. You know, people have all kinds of dreams and experiences, but you want to verify. So I said, "Baba, you came to me in a dream and you gave me this book. And you said that this was your book, you gave it to me." He took the book from me and he went through every page again like he did in the dream, opened it up to the chapter that said, "Be still and know that I am God." And he handed it to me and he said,
Oh,
"My
wow.
book."
Right.
My book.
Right.
But in those days, people didn't read any books but Baba's books. So if you were going to read a book that wasn't Baba's book, you had to put his cover on it so people would think it was his book. Because in those days, people didn't understand that everything was God and God was everything. And this is the situation we often find today, is that people
Right.
think their way is the only way, is the right way. And therein lies the great divide. So he gave me this beautiful ring. And he said, "Your first wedding gift." Well, it wasn't until 3 years later, we came back again in 1977 with Mrs. Cowan to the dedication of the youth hostel, and President Jati presided there. And Walter and Elsie Cowan, in those days, people didn't think to give to God in that way, but they did. They were pioneers. They were always thinking about God. That was the thing Elsie would always say. She would grab Baba's hand and she'd call him honey. Nobody
Oh.
calls Baba honey and gets away with it. Swami maybe, but not honey. But
Very
she'd
unusual.
grab his hand and she'd say, "Honey, what can I do for you?"
Oh.
Say, "Oh no, I only want your love." She said, "I know that. What else can I do?" And she was persistent. So she was always giving. We're just learning to give. But she was the way shore. She was the pioneer. She and Walter really set the stage for the people in the West, particularly the United States. When we came back that first trip, Elsie and my mother and myself started the first bhajan center in Tustin. Now it's about 500 people. It's huge, but in those days it was just the three of us. And since I was driving up every Friday night to the one and only other Sai Center, the Hollywood Center that had bhajans, that's where I learned bhajans. And I would drive up every Friday night, 16 years old, in a blue Comet with wings on the Santa Ana Freeway at night by myself. And I learned bhajans. So we'd come back and I would lead and my mother would follow and Elsie would clap. And Elsie didn't particularly like bhajans. She called them bhajams. But she was such a good sport. So if it was for Baba, it was good. She would do anything for Baba. So, in fact, that's the one thing. She and Walter established the Sai Baba Society meetings in Southern California. And it was the only thing like that ever for 40 years. And people were invited from all over. It was the beginning of all the meetings, the centers, the things that we're doing today. They had the foresight to do something, and we owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude because they were the way shores at that time. And I remember her saying one time at the first Sunday meeting, she said, "Learn to love. And if you don't know how to love, get a dog, but learn to love something. Learn to love." And that was always what she taught us.
Right.
And so in 1977, we went back and I had been continuing to volunteer at the bookstore. And one day, Elsie and Walt Neubauer, who was then the manager, and Swami was so kind, he brought another Walt because Elsie had difficulty with names. So she called people Sweetie and Honey because she couldn't remember their names. So she said, "We have someone new coming to the bookstore today." And so Walt Neubauer and Elsie Cowan brought over Robert Daniele. And but we never talked, didn't know who he was. And I was upstairs writing orders and doing the paperwork, and he was downstairs packing and doing anything and everything that needed to be done. So I didn't know who he was, and we never talked. We went to bhajans. We had bhajans in the temple beneath. In fact, in those days, Elsie did something that nobody even thought of. She bought 4 condominiums for Baba. 4. Who does that?
4 condominiums. Wow.
Yes. And one was where she lived. One was Swami's guest house for who he brought. The third one was his house, and the temple, because she had the wisdom to have a temple set up and arranged there. And then the book center was the fourth one. And so he was working there. We would have bhajans, and I would sit on the women's side and he on the men, but we didn't know it. You didn't talk after bhajans, you went home. So we went to India in 1977, and Bob took all of us to the airport that day. But before we left, and I was in the other room getting my bags, and he said, you know, make sure you ask Baba everything. That was all he said, not much to go on. I said, everything? He said, yes, everything. I said, oh, okay. That was it. And I didn't even know his last name at that, nothing. But what I didn't know was that Elsie was playing matchmaker.
I see. I see.
He would talk to me on the side and say, see that condominium over there? That would make a nice honeymoon cottage. And I would just look at her. I was so embarrassed. I was 21 at that time. And apparently she would do the same thing to him, and he didn't know what she was talking about either. So when we went to the dedication at the youth hostel, Baba called us in for dinner that night, and he served us the most scrumptious meal I have ever tasted in my entire life.
Oh, wow.
And he kept serving and serving, and he was serving.
I see.
He was serving and serving. And when one of his students would come and move my water glass, he'd say, no, that's her water glass, put it back. Everything was just right. But you see, everything Baba does is a teaching. It isn't just about the water glass. He was showing that God has a plan and that everything he does is perfect. And he does it perfectly, and he does it with intention. He's always showing us the way, how to live our lives, not to be perfect, but to strive to live with intentionality.
Right.
And so he went around the table and he asked Walt and Julie and Elsie if they had questions, and I was dying inside. And I said, oh God, please don't ask me if I have a question. Please don't ask me about it. I thought I would melt into a puddle of butter, because in those days I was so shy. Elsie would say to me, come up here, honey. Come sit here by Baba. Take your place with him. I didn't understand the wisdom in that at that time.
Amazing.
Place. And when you think about it, we each have a place at God's feet.
Right.
We have to choose that place. We have to choose to be at his feet. Yeah. So he went around the table, and then he sat back in his chair like this, and he looked at me and he said, you. And he took Elsie and I into another room, and the two of them proceeded to talk about me like I wasn't there. I was a ghost. And they proceeded to have this long conversation about me.
I see.
Well, who is this man? His name is Robert Daniele, Elsie would say. What does he do? Oh, he's a businessman. Well, has he been married before? Yes, but that's over, she would say. He said, well, this seemed to be important. Who asked for the divorce? And so Elsie explained that the spouse had asked for it, not Bob, because apparently that made a difference. Right. And then he said, are there children? She says, oh yes, wonderful children, beautiful, but they're all grown up. Like she left nothing, no loose ends. And they went back and forth. It seemed like an eternity. And I was just watching back and forth. And then when they were finished, it was like they were two marriage brokers. And he sat back in his chair and he looked at me. And mind you, I didn't know.
You had no idea. No idea.
No. And he said, you go home and get married immediately.
Oh, wow.
He is a good man. And that was good enough for me. I never knew if I would get married. I never knew if I even wanted to get married, because I knew that in order for me to marry anyone, it would have to take a very unusual person, because I loved God and I love Swami with all my heart. And it would take a very unusual person to be able to live with me. I just wouldn't work. And again, everything in my life set me apart. A Christian Scientist. Our life was about prayer, but I didn't understand it until much later. I was a vegetarian when nobody knew what that word meant. There were no
Right,
salad
right.
bars at Marie Callender's. There was nothing, meat and potatoes. And here I was the only vegetarian that anybody knew. And they worried about if I would live the next day to talk about it. And
I see.
then I followed a guru in India named Sai Baba. Again, set me apart, set me apart, set me apart. My whole life I've been set apart. I felt very alone, but not lonely. And I didn't understand why that was important until later when I realized that Swami was my mother, he was my father, he was my counselor. He sent me to school 4 times. I've been in school over 10 years. He sent me to get my bachelor's degree in education and my teaching credential, and I did that about 15 years. And then I taught Balbika's, best thing I ever did, the most wonderful thing I ever did, I'm sure. Then he sent me back to school again to get a master's in counseling psychology and my state marriage and family license, and I practiced that for a number of years. And then he sent me back to school again to get 2 more masters in school counseling and school psychology. And
Amazing.
the thing that is interesting about that is many years before that, Baba came to me in a dream and he said, when are you going to get on with your career? And in those days, I was working at the bookstore. We were first married. Bob was the businessman. You know, I was doing some student teaching and teaching, but I didn't think of myself as the career person. And I pointed and I said, career? He said, no, your thinking. I did not know what he meant. And it has been 50 years of unfolding like the petals of a rose.
Right.
All that means our career isn't business. Our career isn't CEO enterprises. Our career is not being a therapist or a teacher or a doctor. Our career is not being the best, the most, the richest, the smartest, the wisest, the most acclaimed. Those are vehicles for his love. Our career is our thinking, and our thinking is our choice to sit at his feet, in our heart, in our mind, to think about God. Because when we think about God, the career we choose, the path we choose, the words we choose, the work we choose, what we choose to do is a vehicle for his love. And that's why it's very important. And I began to realize why he gave me big earrings and big necklaces and big rings, because I felt small. I felt unimportant. I felt like I didn't matter. I was always in the shadow. I grew up in a family where everybody was at least a generation older than me.
Right.
So I was young and I had no one to talk to, no one to share my heart with, no one to say, let's talk about God. I couldn't be like other people. I didn't go to parties. I didn't drink. I didn't do those things. It made me very alone, especially through high school. That was a really difficult period because you don't want to be the odd one out. But there I was, all by myself most of the time, but not lonely because Baba was with me. And I began to realize what a gift it was because I didn't have ordinary friends. I didn't have confidants. I only had God. And God peopled my world with extraordinary friends. Elsie Cowan and Julie and Harry Miles and my mom and Jerry and Joanne Pesci and the people that really loved God and Bob Bazzani and Bob and Barbara Bazzani and the people, he peopled my life with extraordinary friends. And they weren't my age, most of them. It didn't matter. The only thing that we had in common was God. And when you have God, there's no age, there's just love. And it was amazing. And the reason I say it's amazing is because my mother and father divorced when I was quite young.
Right.
So my father was out of the picture very early and just wasn't there. He was a good man, honest, but he just wasn't there. And he was very angry about the divorce and our life falling apart, our family, and he developed cancer. And he told me many years later that he realized his resentment caused the cancer. And when he realized that, he realized that he could heal himself. And he did. He healed himself of cancer when he forgave. And my mother worked full time. She'd leave at 7 a.m. and she'd get home 7, 8 at night. I never saw her. So I worked at home, always trying to make sure the house was okay, cooked and cleaned, but she wasn't there. And I had no confidence. I only had God. So God became my mother and God became my father. And he made sure I had a good education. He said to me, education is very important. You must go to school. Nobody had ever talked to me like that. I always knew I would go to college, but there were no plans. There was no talk. Everybody was too busy. But he made sure I got educated. And that's why that's important. And so he became my best friend. And when he gave me the necklace when he married us, he gave me a Mangala Sutra and he held that up, but it wasn't like most Mangala Sutras. It was very different looking. It was a gold beaded necklace. And he held it up and he said, God is your best friend.
Right.
And I remember that, because God is always with you. And when I came back in 1977 and Bob picked us up at the airport. And first conversation we ever had, he said, "Oh, I'd love to hear about your trip." He said, "How about I'll take you to Coco's, little coffee shop. We'll have pancakes." So then I said, "Oh, great. We're going to sleep another night, a sleepless night waiting to tell him, guess what? You're going to marry me, And so he picked me up and we went and had pancakes. Date we ever had. And he said, "So tell me everything Bob has said to you." And I said, "Oh, great. Here we go with everything again." I said, "Everything?" He said, "Yes, everything. I want to know everything." I said, "Okay. Well, Baba told me to get married." He said, "That's great."
Oh, he said that.
I said, "To you." The fork stopped midair. He said, "To me?" He said, "But I can't get married." And it turned out he was so worried that it wouldn't be fair to me that I'd never been married. Why should I marry him? He said, "I'm going to go to India myself and talk to Baba."
Right.
He had been there in 1976. He spent 3 months and Baba never talked to him. And that's quite a story. Bob needs to tell you that himself. He said, "I'm going to go talk to Elsie." So he went and talked to Elsie, and Elsie explained how she and Swami had talked and that he knew that he had been married. He knew about the children. He knew that he was a businessman and that he had selected him. And so I guess the reason I'm telling you some of these things is that I spent my whole life feeling like I didn't matter. I felt very small. I felt invisible. And what he showed me was I'm not invisible and I do matter. I mattered so much that he pulled me up close to sit by him in his chair. I mattered so much that he chose my husband. I mattered so much that he made sure I got a good education. I mattered so much that he told me what work he wanted me to do. And I mattered so much that he was going to coach me and guide me and teach me about how to think about God. And I share that with great love and humility because
of course,
all of us matter. All of us matter. It's just a microcosm and a macrocosm. Each and every one of us matters so much to God that it's like Baba says and Swami saying from I to we to he. And to my way of thinking, it means we go from I, which means we feel like nothing. We move on to we, and then we feel like we're something.
Right.
And then we move on to he and realize we're everything. We're everyone. And we matter. Each and every one of us matters so much to him. Not only we matter, but how we look out on the world and look out at people and love his creation. And we matter and they matter because there aren't two, there's only one. And when we look out, we see him, we love him, we're not loving, there is no other. And so it's just, I wanted to stop here because I really love for Bob to tell his story about what Swami said to him on the plane in
Sure.
1970.
How are we doing on time?
We are, Bob, we have as much time as you and Rita would like. We are actually enjoying every second of this conversation.
Okay.
And I would
Okay.
love to hear about your
Okay.
experience so far. It's been
Let-
really
let
amazing
me-
how Swami brought you together. And
Very good. Little background. My parents are immigrants. And so I was first generation, essentially, U.S. person. I grew up in the vineyards of Southern California, where there were nothing but grape vineyards in those days. It was wine country in the 30s, 1930s. And most of the people that lived in our little community were also immigrants from Italy. So we played day and night and all the time. The kids barefooted, we never had shoes. We'd just run and play through the vineyards. We'd come home with stains of grapes all over our t-shirts because we had little games where we threw them at each other. And so that was the upbringing. And during the Second World War, the Italians were very sensitive because Mussolini is part of the Axis. So
right,
right across from our home was maybe 1,000 acres of vineyards. And behind us was another 1,000 acres of vineyards. And there was 7 or 8 homes where Italian families were all given land by the owner of all those vineyards to build a house so he could have Italian families around him and people for his kids to play with. And they built an anti-aircraft installation right across from our house because Lockheed Aircraft was half a mile away. And they were building P-38s by the thousands. So our family used to take turns taking food to the soldiers at night at 7 or 8 o'clock. They ate early, so they'd bring coffee and donuts and things just to show them that our patriotism and that we were trying to be best Americans that we could.
right.
And so that's the growing up part. But what really changed my life was in the 1970s when I was single, working hard day and night. And I had a stroke, a really bad stroke. I didn't go to the hospital. I just laid in a bed and people brought me soup and stuff like that. It was about 8 weeks. I couldn't walk and I didn't have good balance. And somebody brought me a book and said, you know, you're here all day, read this. And it was Autobiography of a Yogi. I read that and I get that during that period, I got stronger. And I started going to Self-Realization Fellowship in Encinitas, California, to their weekly prayer group and meditation group throughout the week. So I went there for many years. And I had friends, our mothers were friends. Mary Bazzani and my mother, Louisa Guasti, were good friends and were members of the Italian Women's Club of Los Angeles, so they know each other. So I hooked up with Bazzani and I started talking to him, and we had a little budgeon group in Bazzani's house. He owned a house right on the ocean. So I would go there on Thursday nights and we played Janet Box and what's his name?
Dick
and Janet Bach. They made the learning tapes 11 and 12 to teach us bhajans because we didn't know them. And we would play the tapes and follow. So there was 4 of us. There was Barbara Bazzani, Bob Bazzani, myself, and Howard. And the Bazzani kids they were teenage, and they would peek and think we were really weird. Mom and Dad have really gone long, deep end.
Well, in those days, Barbara Bazzani was going to see Indra Devi.
Yes.
She was
Indra Devi, the yoga.
That's where Bob found out about Indra Devi.
I found out about the yoga, so I went down and met her and moved there for a summer and helped her with the ranch. She had a ranch in Tecate, Mexico. You know, I help her garden, I'd help her do things and fix things. And then I stayed for the yoga thing. And every night we would sing bhajans that she knew, and I would follow to Swami. She had a little place downstairs. And one thing that she was really good at, she was an interesting lady, Andrew Devi. She was a wife of a Polish diplomat in Delhi. And this was really early on. It must have been 1890, 1910, and she wanted to learn yoga. And they wouldn't, in India in those days, women were not permitted to do yoga. So she pulled some strings, and the diplomatic corps insisted that they were using a government building for free to do yoga, that they would permit her to do yoga. So they put a curtain up, and she was on one side of the curtain and they were the other. And the instructor said, I will teach you yoga on one condition, that you're able to stand on your head for 30 minutes. Well, she did it. Indra Devi stood on her head for 30 minutes. So he put up a curtain, and she learned yoga on one side of the curtain, and the men were on the other side of the curtain. What a strong lady she was. But anyway, I heard about Sai Baba through her, and then also through Sam's book, which came out about that time in 1972.
Actually, Indra Devi and Elsie Cowan were good friends.
They were good friends.
They
Baba used to
call each other sisters. They were actually the same height and weight.
So that was my first trip to India, where I went for 3 months, and the crowds are small, maybe 100 people on Thursday and Sunday morning. We all gathered around that banyan tree, and Swami would come out. It was fantastic. And he'd talk to the guy next to me, and the guy in front of me, and the guy behind me. This was 3 months worth. Never said a word to me.
I see.
And, I really felt like, well, maybe I'm a Westerner. Maybe that's why. But he talked to other Westerners. Al Drucker and that bunch of guys that were there. And we flew with Swami to Delhi. We flew with Swami to Madras, Hyderabad. We always were 120th on the waiting list. In those days in India, you could sign up for every day of the week to get a seat. And then if you showed up, you got the seat. But there was always 100 on the waiting list.
I see.
Even if you're 100 on the waiting list, you just went there with your bags and just waited, and hopefully there was a seat somewhere along the line. And we went
to share one story about that. One time we were like, I think 260 on the waiting list, and we were in Madras waiting to get on the flight with Baba. And we told him the waiting list was so long. He said, go there. So we waited at the hotel all night, going back and forth to the airport to see if we had a seat. And finally, the hotel manager comes out about 2 in the morning, and he said, can I help you? And he took us over to the airport, and he did something behind the counter, and he took us down to the other side, and he gave us the last 2 seats.
Swami's grace, of course.
That was beautiful. Anyway, on this flight to Madras, we went every meeting, everything, all the darshans, all the discourses. We're finally going home. We get on the plane. The entrance is in the back. I get the back seat on the aisle, and Swami sits in the back seat on the other side of the aisle. And I thought, this is my chance. I've got almost an hour to chit-chat with God himself. He didn't say a word. He pulled out this pamphlet. I'm flying. I said, oh, Swami, I've been here 3 months. You haven't even said hello to me or Sai Baba. Who are you and what's your name? That's what he always asks people. What is your name? What do you want? Nothing. And I was really kind of sad. It's a long time, I left my kids back there, and I left my business. 3 months out of the real estate business is a big deal. You just don't leave for 3 months and make any money, because your clients are
not loyal.
These are commercial clients. They're not selling houses. These are guys that buy Starbucks locations, that kind of thing. Market locations and this, and build shopping centers. So I was really sad. So anyway, he's right across from me. And I'm just saying, can you just look at me or just say,
Right.
how did you
Say
like it?
something.
Say something, please. Nothing. And he was stumbling. We're getting close to Bangalore. And he is reading this book and he tilts it towards me. And it says, the title of it is The Great Conductor. I said, oh, Swami, please, I really appreciate all this that you've done. I've learned a lot here in India. I see all the wonderful things you're doing for students and everybody. I'm going home back to Yogananda, which satisfies my interest in coming close to the Lord, my Catholic church for my family. I'm leaving. And he gets up when we land and he goes out. And I looked up and in my mind, I said, goodbye, Swami, you're a great man. I appreciate what you're doing. And he leaves. And I said, that's it, I'm going home.
That's
and
it.
He comes back into
I
the
see.
airplane and he looks me right in the eye. He must have been
Peeked over the seat.
He peeked over the seat. His face was about a half a foot from me. He
Right.
said, are you coming?
Oh my God.
The
Okay.
exact words I've said at
Right.
SRF
Right.
every time in those long meditations, because you can go deep, even if you're worldly. You sit there for an hour, and some of the meditations were 6-hour meditations.
I see.
You get some visualization inside, and I always said, I'm coming, Lord, I'm coming. Because I found
I see.
that in the meditations, and he said those exact words to me. Are you
Are you
coming?
coming? Are you coming? Oh, how
I
sweet.
said, yes, Swami, I'm coming. And that changed the whole picture. I went home and I started going to the bookstore and helping a little bit, still doing my business, but going whenever I could to do that.
I'd like to just share one little story that's really more about Bob, but it's just to highlight how not only does he hear Bob's prayer, I'm coming, Lord. Again, our thinking, we think thoughts and we don't think our thoughts have power or meaning or that anybody can hear it. I mean, when we're really thinking about it, we think, of course, God can hear it, but most of the time we don't think about it. Well, Bob had always had he'd felt a kinship with Mother Teresa, loved the work that she did, and just thought the world of her. And one day we were coming home from Puja Party, and it was about 4 a.m. in the Bangalore airport. It was pretty rustic in those early days. It was the old Bangalore airport. Most of you probably remember that. And it was about 4 a.m. And all of a sudden, this hush came over the whole airport inside. And there was not a soul except standing there about 2 feet away from us was Mother Teresa.
I see.
And Bob went up and he said, oh, Mother, God bless you, Mother. And she put her hands, they were like
Big, yeah.
And rough, like like she was chopping wood. Those were hard working hands. And she put them on Bob's head and she said, and bless you, my son.
Wow.
Even that desire to meet Mother Teresa that he had had throughout the years, because he studied all the saints in the Catholic Church, and his heart was really, Mother Teresa held a special place in his heart. Even that small wish, even that, God made a place for. And as soon as they realized what happened, all the sisters came and cloistered around her, and whisked her away. But for just that moment,
yes,
it was our moment.
Yes.
Incredible. Incredible.
Yes.
Bob, you and Rita both knew Elsie Cowan and Walter Cowan. And you mentioned about this incident, and I had read about it, in fact, when many years ago when I came across Swami, I heard this story and I could not believe my ears. I mean, I knew it's truth, but I could not really believe what I was hearing, that he passed away.
Yes.
And he was in, I don't know, mortuary for 3 days. And then Swami went and brought him out.
Well, it's interesting because I was really fortunate to have known Walter and Elsie. And I came because I was pretty young at that point, and I was just starting at the bookstore, but I was able to get to know Walter a little bit. I for about 18 months before he passed the second and last final time. But Elsie had actually documented what had happened, and Dr. Jack Hislop wrote quite a lengthy excerpt on it for Elsie because she asked him, and Walter also wrote about it. And we were very much afraid that that would get lost with all of the changes that had happened at the bookstore, and things were being moved and, you know, thrown out, and we were afraid that that would get lost. And that was a very important piece, we felt. And so we found the original copy that Elsie had written and Dr. Jack Hislop had written, and Walter, and we included it in our book because we felt that that was quite an important historical piece. And it was in Madras, and it was, I believe, Christmas, and Walter had passed in the night, and they apparently that day Baba was giving a talk, and Dr. Hislop was with him while he was giving the talk, and he stopped and he said, "Oh, Mrs. Cowan has sent me a telegram." That was his words. And to make a long story short, apparently Mrs. Hislop was outside in a cab, and because I guess in that meeting women weren't allowed. So Swami turned to Dr. Hislop and he said, "You'll find Mrs. Hislop outside in a cab, hiding. You can take the cab to her to the hospital. Walter Cowan has passed, and Mrs. Cowan has sent me a telegram." Well, the telegram was actually her prayer.
I see.
Called her prayer a telegram. And she had asked Mrs. Rottenlaw, who was in the room next door, to help her get Walter back on the bed. And the ambulance came, and they took him to the hospital, and then he was pronounced dead. And so they had put cotton in his ears and nose and put a sheet over his head, and he was in the morgue. And Swami resumed his talk. And then sometime later, he went to go see Walter, and he pulled the sheet off and he said, "Rise, Cowan, I have work for you to do."
Wow.
What I thought was interesting, he took Walter to a court of judgment. I didn't know that there actually was a real court of judgment. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me, but I've never seen that or documented anywhere as an actual experience, but apparently there is. And he was in a court, and a judge was reviewing all of his past lives. And apparently Walter had lived quite remarkable lives that stood for dharma, righteousness, spiritual politics. He was a very dharmic man in all of his lives, and was always trying to help people and humanity, and was involved in a lot of service in most of his lives, and quite prominent positions. And I could name a few, but you can read about it in the book. But anyhow, as the judge was going over the lives, they were in different languages that have been out of circulation for eons because they no longer exist. And the judge said, "Who claims this soul?" And Sai Baba walked into the court. He said, "I do." And the judge was very familiar with Sai Baba. And as he was reviewing the lives in all the languages, Baba understood them all. And finally up into the current where Walter could understand him. And apparently the most important thing wasn't what he did. The most important thing in his judgment day was his intentions in whatever he did. Not the outcome, but the intentions.
Intentions.
Yes, the intentions. And so Sai Baba continued reviewing his lives with the judge. And the judge said, "Who claims this soul?" And Baba said, I do. And he said, he has not yet finished the work that he has come to this earth to do. And he said, I take responsibility for him. And so that was when he went and he and Elsie started Baba named it the Sri Satya Sai International Book Center of America. Well, by today's standards, it doesn't look like too much, but in those days, it was really something. And that's how that started. And there was he even had a piece of paper that he signed officially naming it and giving his blessings. Because Elsie was also a pretty shrewd businesswoman. She knew that there would be problems if she didn't have documentation. In fact, just one cute story, one time when we were in Puda Party, there were a lot of the big important people, and they were all men, and they were complaining about being the leaders that they were, that Elsie Cowan, this was after Walter had passed, Elsie Cowan was not doing things the way they thought they should be done. And Baba looked at them and he let them finish complaining. And then he leaned forward in his chair and he said, Mrs. Cowan is a little old lady who has built the Sri Satya Sai International Book Center of America. What have you done? Nobody said another word after that.
Wow.
Nobody said another word after that.
Yeah.
How sweet. Rita,
May I share a couple
oh, yes,
stories
yes,
about
Bob, please go
Swami?
ahead. Yes, of course, please go ahead.
Let's go to about 2015.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And I had written a letter to Swami in Mudenhali, and I mailed it. And in the letter,
Before you say that, I think we should just say one thing. We had heard, actually, the first people that had told us about Swami in the subtle form is Jerry and Joanne Pesci. They're hiding in the background usually, but they're there. And we thought, well, that's interesting. And but we weren't too interested. We were very embedded in the organization. Bob was on the trust. We run the Satya Sai Society meetings. We worked at the bookstore for almost 45 years. You know, we were happy, and we weren't missing anything, and we felt Baba every day. We didn't feel his absence when he made his the transition out of the body. We were glad that he wasn't in pain because he had taken on the suffering of a young boy. But the fact that he was using a young student, a Madhusudan at that point, we just weren't interested because it seemed to contradict his saying, I don't need anyone between you and me. I don't use other people. So we weren't interested. And then I think about 2014, Bob Bazzani, a longtime friend, in fact, he was the best man at our wedding. He said, you know, I really need to talk to you both, and I need to talk to you in person. So we went up and had lunch with him. And because of who he was and what he stood for, his personal integrity and character, we listened. And he started telling us about some of his personal experiences that he had because he had gone down to a meeting in San Diego at Sam Sandweiss's. Maybe we're not, anyhow, not to name names, but we listened and we really didn't know. And, you know, this is, I go back to my early beginnings where I said we left our church.
Right.
It's here again where I would say, for the second time, we left our church. And the reason that's important is because you don't realize sometimes in your devotion and your love for God, that even though you might not be physically in a church, sometimes we build another church around a form and who we think God is, and we box ourselves in. So for the second and final time, we left our church again. And at that time, Bob thought, you know.
At that time, David and Jenny Cornsweet were traveling with Madhusudan Sai and with the light body. And they were in Canada. And I had written a letter to Swami in Mudenhali. And so I called David in Canada and I said, David, I had sent a letter to Swami inviting him to come to the bookstore to visit his bookstore.
I see.
And he said, you did what? Because they had a plan. He and Jenny had flights all scheduled, could go here, leave at 10:15,
We didn't
arrive
know
at
better. We were just,
Jenny had a schedule that was by the minute. And he said,
Right.
"You did what?" I said, "Yes, I invited him to come and visit his bookstore." And he
Right.
said, "I'll call you back in 5 minutes." A minute later, he had talked to Swami. He said, "Swami, we'll be there tomorrow at noon for lunch." I said, "Oh my God."
Oh, how sweet.
Okay, so he's coming. So we got a bunch of people.
well, there weren't that many people. We were scurrying because the night before I was still working as a high school counselor at Santa Ana High School, and I was in charge of the graduation. There were hundreds of students, and we were up till after 11. I didn't get home till after midnight. We were up at 4 o'clock the next morning, getting the bookstore ready, vacuuming, cleaning toilets, buying flowers, filling
we
candy
went
balls.
to Trader Joe's. We bought every flower they had in several of their stores. Every piece of chocolate they had, we filled bowls full of chocolate. We had flowers everywhere you looked. We
Oh,
had
how
tables
sweet.
set up with silk, with
Right.
beautiful tablecloths. We had silver place settings for everybody.
Well, we didn't know how to cook the Indian food, and even that was provided. There was a devotee who has asked to remain nameless for certain reasons, and she did all the cooking.
Yes.
Everything was there.
Yeah.
And I mean, even crystal and fine china and silver, everything was there.
Incredible.
And it was ready to go. As soon as we put the last rose in its place, up pulls the limousine. Swami he gets out of the car and he walks up, and the first thing is he says, "Where is my room? I want to see my room." And
Oh, wow.
Elsie had built that book center from the ground up, and she had made a room and a bathroom just for Swami that had never, to that day, all these years, had never been used.
Right.
And a devotional room where we had chanted the Gayatri mantra for 22 years, 108 times. Swami told us to do the
Every
Gayatri
Friday
mantra
night.
every Friday night. And when he walked in, he looked at the memorabilia that was there of Walter and Elsie Cowan's remarriage ceremony, because when he brought Walter back from life, he said, "I must remarry you because you're living in sin."
Oh,
So
I
he
see.
remarried them. So he gave
I
them
see.
both rings and her mangalas. All of that was there, and the
How
letters
sweet.
stating the bookstore and giving his
Right.
permission. And then we walked into his private quarters, and he turned to Bob and I, and he said, "Do you know why I have come today?"
Hmm.
He said, and mind you, at this point, we really didn't know at
Right.
that point if it was
Right.
Baba. We
Of
hoped it
course.
was. We weren't sure. And we were really, really sticking our necks out here. Everything we lived for 40 plus years. He said, "I came today to fulfill Cowan's wish.
Oh,
Mrs. Cowan, I promised her that I would come."
And she had been gone a long time already. She had passed.
oh, wow. I see. I
She had
see.
passed a long time back.
Elsie built that and wanted him to come to the US because, again, it wasn't for her. You know what her wish was?
No.
She wanted him to come for all the people that didn't have the money or the time to go to India to see
Oh, I
him.
see. I
It was
see.
so selfless.
Yes. And I was the real estate broker and did it commission free. The first commission free I had ever done in my life.
That was
Did it
for
commission
Elsie
free.
Cowan.
We bought the old Van Hove garage,
Right.
and it was a brick building, beautiful building, but Elsie wanted it torn down and start fresh.
I see.
Baba sent Indala Shaw there
And Mrs. Shaw.
and Mrs. Shaw to bring sand from Puttaparthi and put it in the foundation, and then
I
we
see.
built the building.
And that was when he brought the first Sevadal scarves. They were red, orange and yellow. Those were the first time he had ever initiated Sevadals wearing scarves. It was very sweet.
Very sweet.
And then he brought Budi and Padukas to lead in the devotional room. And he looked around the room and he was very happy. And he said, "I will return love here." And, that was such a beautiful thing because Elsie, everything she did was for the love of God. There was nothing selfish in what she did ever.
Amazing.
I can remember I can remember one time on our first trip, we were flying through Hong Kong. There were 7 of us. And Elsie would get up at midnight and I would be there in the room with her because I was helping her. And she would start counting. She had these long pockets in her dresses and they were always full of candy or something sweet. So she'd get up and she'd say, 1 for Elsie, 1 for Julie, 1 for Marie, 1 for, she'd make sure everybody had an equal amount of candy because that was her sweetness. She was always giving, and she taught us to give. And God, through her, taught us how to love and to give and how to give service.
Of
That
course.
was such a new concept in the West.
As soon as Swami left, I called each one of the trustees that were us. We were members together in the Book Center Trust.
Right.
Called every one of them, and I told them that what we had done, we'd written a letter to Baba, Swami, and invited him to his bookstore. So I called every one of them and told them. The next morning, I went back to the bookstore just to get my coffee cup and a couple of little personal things.
Right.
They had already changed the locks in the bookstore.
Oh my God.
We were locked out.
My key wouldn't work anymore.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Bob. Yeah.
I think the thing that's important to say is that,
Our time
quite
never
honestly, I thought we might die there. We had spent over 40 years there, even though we both had full-time careers. We took care of my mother and my father and his mother and his father.
Right.
We were very busy, but we never quit working at the book center. We had the first Sunday meeting and Gayatri and bhajans, but we never ceased working there. And we quite honestly thought we would probably have our ashes buried there. And we just couldn't see our life not being there serving. But you see, very often we box ourselves into what we think is good for us.
Right.
And I remember that was one of the first things Baba ever said to me. He said, whatever I do for you is good.
And
whatever I do for you, whatever I do is good for you. And when they locked us out, there was no grief. It was like a death, but there was no grief.
Right.
And it was like losing your church and your community, everyone you ever knew and loved. It was starting out in a whole new world, and we didn't know where we were. We weren't even sure it was Baba at that point. We hoped it was, but it was like climbing up to the tallest mountain and looking down the cracks and crevices and seeing this valley and not knowing if you had wings to fly. And him telling you jump, and you hope that he would catch you because you hope him. And at that trip on 2015, we were in a private interview with our 2 daughters. And it was at that time that Swami told us, I am going to take you with me. And Donna and Lisa were very upset. They started to cry. He said, no. And they started to cry. He said, no tears. No, I am taking them with me. And he asked us to close up shop, so to speak. I shredded I took notes from every interview, from every darshan, from every trip for almost 50 years, twice a year. Meticulous notes. I had more than 10 notebooks like this, meticulous notes, typewritten. Every picture, every note, everything I shredded. And I said, oh God, please tell me I'm doing the right thing. We got rid of everything and we came to India with 4 suitcases. Our entire life was in 4 suitcases. And we still really didn't know if that was Baba. And he called us up to Prem Deep when we got there the first morning. And we sat outside Prem Deep and went into a deep meditation. And we were waiting for him. And after we were there about an hour, a voice inside of me said, look. And I said, what? Open your eyes and look. And I opened my eyes, and there was Satya Sai Baba standing in his white robe. And I said,
Wow.
"Oh my God, Baba, it really is you." You know, we had to walk out on faith. He didn't
Right.
show us with him until after we left everything behind. It was
Right.
like Noah's Ark. We left everything.
Incredible.
Friends,
Incredible.
family, belongings, careers, reputation, community. And we came here empty-handed. And
Right. Right.
he is filling our hands.
Everything
Amazing.
everything we ever wanted in our lives has been given here. Has been given
Sai
to us
Ram.
here.
Sai Ram. Sai Ram.
Everything. There's nothing that we desire or have anxiety for. It's been given. Swami has given everything you need. You have a thought and you look around and it happens within. Look at Pala and Shiva coming this morning to set
Yes,
up
I
this
was
whole
surprised.
computer thing.
I was
They were here
surprised,
My
Bob.
last.
guardian angel.
I mean, these guys around here are
They
taking
look like people, but if you look carefully, you see little wings coming out their back.
Sabasani. I missed going to the canteen to get my porridge and toast one morning. And I went there and Sabasani, the manager at the canteen, she scolded me in front of
Where have you
everybody.
been?
Where have you been? You have to tell me when you're not coming. Can you believe it? And the Italian cooks bring us, they bring us torta, spinach torta when they make it. They bring us lasagna right to the room. How can you can't be
Well,
treated
the
like that
point is-
anywhere.
the point
That is true,
that
Bob. That is
God
true.
God empties your cup
Yeah.
and then he fills it.
Oh, how sweet. How sweet. Rita, there was one statement you made, and I would like to ask you if you could elaborate. You said Swami says this body is not Sai Baba.
Yes.
And you told me to remind you to.
Yes. So thank you. So in those early years in Whitefield, Baba would have an early morning darshan at 4 a.m. and we would drive out every Thursday and Sunday.
Right.
And as I said, in 1974, when he was in the room, he said, "This body is not Sai Baba." And the night before, there were several, maybe a dozen, 10 Westerners that came down to the room, and they were talking about everything that was going wrong in the United States. And they were talking about depression, and they were talking about war, and they were talking about everything that was going to happen and what Baba was going to do and how he was going to intervene. Well, it was Julie Miles at that time had lived through the Great Depression, as my father and mother had, and that brought terror into her heart because she had lived through poverty and not having enough food, and you know, sometimes people just they repeat things and they don't always think about the effect it has on the other people because they don't know what they've been through. It's not intentional, but still.
Right. Right.
So after they left, Julie and I were sitting in the room, and Julie was talking about her concern about the economy and what was going to happen. And the next morning she woke up, and I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, "Honey, this is the day the Lord hath made." And that was the day that Sai Baba came down to our room. And that was the day that he first told me about my husband to be. And that was when he said, "These devotees coming and telling you these stories, it is not me. I do not frighten people. These are not things that I have said. This body is not Sai Baba. Sai Baba knows everything." And he was trying to say we limit him to his form. So then fast forward to Vrindavan in 1977, he would have these early morning darshans. And there was this one early morning darshan, and I looked up and I could see, and I don't see things particularly, auras or things, but this morning you could see Baba's aura, enormous aura of gold and pink and blue. And it was so powerful, I literally passed out, the light from it. I passed out. And he was showing us his true form. He's light. And that's why this light body, he's not limited to that form. And, you know, coming here, he was teaching us how to trust in him, and to know that he is the formless, because the form, it comes and it goes, and we limit him to that form. What happens when the form is gone?
Right, right.
Our relationship is gone. So he was showing us that it's like a Madhusudan Sai was saying the other day in a talk, in a discourse, he said, when Shirdi Sai is gone, and Satya Sai is gone, and Prema Sai is gone, and this Sai is gone, when all Sais are gone, then you will know who you are. You are God. And he's teaching us that he is the formless and that he is God. And that's why he said, this body is not Sai Baba. Don't limit me to this body. And so showing us his aura, or manifesting in front of me when we were at Prem Deep, but it comes after you believe. It doesn't come before so that you believe. You believe, you jump off that cliff, and he catches you, but you don't say, let me see the wings first, and then I'll jump.
Right, right.
The early morning darshan in Whitefield, when Swami was there on Thursdays and Sundays, he would always come out at 5 o'clock in the morning on his balcony, and they would open the gates a few minutes before and let the people in. And then when he went in, you would have to go back out, and they would close the gates, and you couldn't go in until 7 o'clock. But anyway, he would come out on the balcony, and you could see his aura. And then when he walked in, the aura stayed there for at least a minute and just shivered. It would stay there. After he went into the room and opened the door and walked in. It was just other people fainted as well. It was a very powerful experience.
It's incredible. Well, it's now in India, Rita, 8:30 a.m. and I hope we didn't hold you back from the canteen. And
we're going to skip the canteen this morning. You filled us with so much joy that we don't need to eat.
This is our breakfast.
This is our breakfast.
Actually, Rita and Bob, I cannot express our gratitude. You know, as you were speaking, and I'm sure they all feel this love, devotion, and incredible connection with Swami. And I hope that, I would like to thank you for really this precious time that you've given us. But I hope that, again, we get a chance to see you on this program. We've had about close to 70 people, 60 to 70 people that they've been listening to everything, and I hope that we can repeat this wonderful experience sharing that you've granted us. Thank you so much, and I hope, yes, Rita.
One thing, when we came here, when Baba came to the bookstore, I forgot to mention, you remember I told you I wrote all those meticulous notes through the years? I never knew why I did that. It was just a compulsion that I felt like I needed to write everything down. But before I did, when he came and he said, I want to see my room, he turned and he looked at me and he said, where is your book? I said, book? Your book. And he told me to write a book, which, believe me, was the last thing I wanted to do. I knew nothing about books or editing, or last thing I ever wanted to do. But he told us to write a book, which we did, and he named it. And he named it Together in God. And then he picked the picture, this picture. I don't know if you can see.
Oh, yes,
but
yes, very beautiful.
The thing that he pointed out to us, he was very meticulous about the picture and the name. And then he was even more meticulous about this picture. And he said, do you know why I like this picture? I said, no, Swami. He said, I like this picture because it shows me standing behind you every step of the way. And you know, I just finished with one thought. He never told us in all these years, we just had our 47th anniversary, our Baba anniversary, March 1st. And he told us when we moved here, something that he had never told us before. I mean, it seems apparent and it seems logical, but he never outright said it until we came here. And he said, "Do you know why I brought you together?" I said, "Swami." He said, "I brought you together because together you can do more for me than you can do separately."
I see.
So even marriage, even meetings, even people that you think you're just put together with, everything is intentional and planned and matters. Each and every one of us, we matter so much to him. He loves us so much. He plans out our lives in such detail, and then he pretends like he didn't know that. Oh,
How sweet. Rita, you got to tell us more about this. I mean, you've mentioned about this, that everything is in proper order. Everything that all of us, our friends, we come together, especially serving Swami, there is a very precise order. And I hope that next time that you accept our invitation, that you could come and share about this. By the way, I wanted to also, for all the devotees on the line, I have been asked to make this offer that if you send me, please, Janet, if you could kindly put my email address, that we would send them a copy of your book. The only caveat is that please bear with us, because once I get the total count, I need to get hold of the bookstore in India. So the whole process might take a few weeks, but please bear with me. That's my duty. I've been asked to get a copy and send it to everyone who is on this program. And
Swami said he would like to gift everyone
yes,
if
yes,
they wanted it,
yes.
to ask and to.
Saira. So please kindly, Braja, or I'm asking one of our Zoom team members to please put my show my email address name. So kindly please send me through email your name, full name, and address, and where the book should be sent. Very well, Rita, thank you so much. And I see a lot of messages to Bob and you, and everyone is so happy, grateful for you being here. And also, as I said, I'm also overwhelmed with so much love and devotion, and I hope that we can meet you again on this program and share benefit from all these wonderful experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you,
help.
Rita.
God
Pavan,
bless you all.
thank you. Pavan, please, back to you.
Right. Thank you again, Bob and Rita.
Oh,
Very,
thank you.
very enlightening to have you with us, and it was really a very blessed satsang, everyone.
And thank you
This
for
has
being
been-
so patient with us.
Yes.
We had full audience today. A lot of people listen to this. So
Have a nice evening.
have a nice evening. So just before we close, a couple of announcements again. For those of you who missed the beginning of the call, Swami will be visiting us this April in the US, and then we plan to have our satsang at the Los Gatos, our ashram, on April 13th, and more details to follow with the website and other details about the satsang. And then if you would like to have a free copy of the book that Bob and Rita Daniel have written, please reach out to Brother Mehran. And then with that, we're looking forward to everyone again. We'll see you in the next satsang. And with that, we'll end with Om Sri Shantis and Samasta Loka Sukhina Bhava.
Sure.
Samasta
Loka
Sukhino
Bhavantu.
Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu. Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu. Om
Shanti,
Shanti.
Shanti, Shanti. Shanti.
Jai Sai Ram.
Jai Sai Ram. God bless you all.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Rita.
Sai Ram.
Much love,
Sai
Saira.
Ram.